Hello everyone, Sidney St. James, and welcome to Season 5, Episode 1 on the Sidney St. James Show. So you want to be an author? Well, I'm going to tell you what it's like to be an author and how difficult it can be, but I'm going to throw out all the difficulties and try to show you how to do it in 1 year. So let's get started. Hello everyone. On my show today, Season 5, Episode 1, I want to begin by laying out some history to why this is a broadcast that if you ever thought about writing a book, you've retired and you were in the pharmaceutical industry, or you were a fireman, or a geophysicist, or a professional pickleball player, you've always thought about, man, I want to write a book, but you don't have a clue where to go. That was like me over 50 years ago. When I attended Texas A&M University is where I got my start. And if you'll listen to my story, you'll see how much difficulty that I had, and I'm going to share with you over the next 10 episodes how you can avoid all of this difficulty. So stick around and we'll kick this thing off. Okay, we're back. I'm showing the first picture here of the building that is the Texas A&M Library. And downstairs in this building, you walk through the double doors, is where I got my first job at Texas A&M, working in the reserve reading room. And it was in that reserve reading room and in the floor upstairs where all my writing career got started. And I'll tell you the story. My grandmother one time told me, and this was when you're younger, and when you're younger, you don't think about the framework of family history. You just know that you got a big family and you got cousins here and cousins there. But I went to my grandmother one day and I asked her, I said, Grandma, who are the parents of my great-grandfather? And she says, well, son, they're Germans and they can be hard-headed sometimes. I said, what does that mean? Well, I don't know. I don't know about him. I said, Grandma, I'm trying to find out who he was and whatnot. She looked at me and she says, okay, I'll be honest with you, son. She said, your grandfather was an illegitimate child, so nobody talks about him in the family at all. So I went back to Texas A&M and I went back to prove that my grandmother was wrong. I was going to prove who his parents were. And sure enough, by going up to the round microfilm reels, which now you don't have to, it's all on the internet, but I searched the censuses. Now, I'll give you a little hint in geology now. When I was looking for the name that I was looking for, the last two letters of the name was either CE or SF. And I didn't count them in my research because my last name ends with two S's, SS. I thought that was strange. What was this SF? Well, in German, as there were most Germans in the area taking the census at that time, when they wrote the census out, it's called a slur S. And if they weren't German, and they happened to be from England or some other place, then the SS would be written down as CE. Well, I got past both of those, and guess what? I found out who my great-grandfather's parents were. Well, this was exciting. Now I needed to know more, right? Now back then it's much more difficult to do research than it is today. So anyhow, this research led on, and I found out where they came from in Germany and so forth. And I decided, with all this information that I was finding, that I would write a book on German immigration to Texas and highlight my family. Well, the more research I did, the more information I found. And so right before I graduated, I had written the first 3 chapters of the book and put it out with query letters to all these publishers. About, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 publishers. And none of them wrote me back except one. And they accepted my book. And they said, send me a couple of chapters over here and we'll look at it and we'll go from there. Well, I was graduating, I was young, and I wanted a new car, and I wanted to start making money, right? We all did. And so I went out and got me a job. Took me offshore, Gulf of Mexico for 2 weeks. And then when I came in, I had better things to do with my time than write a book, and that was to go see my girlfriend. Well, then 2 weeks went by and I was back offshore again. This went on and on. Well, it went on and on so much that for the next 30 years, the book never got written. Then, finally, I wrote it. And it was called Adversity. In Adversity, it talks about all the trials and tribulations and the problems that they had coming over from Germany. And this happens to be the front cover here, Keeping the Faith. And in Adversity, it takes them from Germany to Matagorda to inland to Fralesburg, Texas. And all along, all of my research showed the different pitfalls. And I'll kind of take you through a little bit of what the book is about. So this happens to be the lake where I used to take my clipboard down. This is outside a small town known as Eagle Lake, Texas. The reason I put this here is that this family from Germany in 1845 came over and they passed Eagle Lake on the way to Columbus to finally get to Fralesburg. And as they passed Eagle Lake, they ran into so many more problems that I'll tell you about in just a moment. But here, as you see, Rastedi in the center of the map, that's where the people came from, my family. And they went up on the coastline to Bremerhaven. And when they got to the coastline, they caught this boat right here. This boat was called the Det Heart. And they took it out into the North Sea with about 200 other Germans. And from the North Sea, they left and they went through the channel, the English Strait, passed through there, and as they passed through there, they got out into the Atlantic Ocean. And when they got into the Atlantic Ocean, they came down and they went around the southern end of Florida, came into the Gulf of Mexico, and continued to travel. But on their way, when they got into the Gulf, a terrible storm hit them, and yellow fever both. They almost sank. A lot of people lost their lives in that particular storm. But once they got near Matagorda, to a small town, everybody on the ship, or almost everybody, got sick with yellow jack, which is known as yellow fever. This happens to be a picture of the town that's no longer there. But with the wagons there, no one was expected coming in, so there wasn't very many wagons. Here is an example of a picture of my family, all loaded up in a wagon, ready to head on further inland towards Columbus. Now, most of the families in this picture here were headed to New Braunfels. Well, they were part of that wagon train until they cut off and headed on over towards Columbus, which would take them into Fralesburg. There were 5 wagons on their trip. I even know the people that were on the wagons, the Fahrencamps, the Frales, and so forth. Well, as they were almost into Columbus, Texas, this is what they ran into near that lake that I talked about earlier. But once they got into Columbus, now right here, the Highway 90 bridge is in the background, and down below is where a ferry would take each wagon across the river. And that's where these folks in my book would cross the river to get into Columbus, Texas. Now, once they were in Columbus, Texas, another story I found in the Colorado County Citizen was a story about this tree right here. This was the hanging tree. Still there today, but not as prominent as you see in the picture. But they looked at the hanging tree, and then they continued on north to Fralesburg, Texas. And there they helped build the Trinity Lutheran Church as you see it today in that picture. Now, this is something that's very important in the book of adversity, and that is the woman in the book is always telling everybody how to keep the faith. Keep the faith. Well, it just so happened in this wagon train, she got yellow fever, and she struggled for almost 7 days. And sure enough, back then, when you catch yellow fever, you don't make it. Well, I can't tell you for sure if she makes it or not. It's a very sad and happy story all in one, but that'd be a spoiler alert, right, if I were to tell you. But anyhow, the fact that these Germans kept the faith during all these struggles and people dying and yellow fever and storms and Indians and whatnot is amazing. Well, but they did keep the faith, and they did continue until they got to Fralesburg. And there, ladies and gentlemen, is where this book takes you. And I'm back on my first picture, which is the library here, because back then, I worked in the library. I also worked in the dairy center for A&M, and I made chocolate milk for the cafeteria. Worked in the reserve reading, was where all the professors would put their books. And I even kept chickens at my apartment on Meadow Glen Lane, just outside the main campus, that I got from the Poultry Science Center and raised them. This is where they taught to teach them how to caponize all the chickens. Anything to make $1 is what I did at A&M. So the reason that I'm talking about this season now is that I ran into a lot of pitfalls where I got on and on and on. Finally, about 12, 15 years ago, I finished Adversity. I published it exclusively on Amazon. Now, I must tell you that when I did this, the reason that I went exclusively with Amazon is it's obvious. It's the Kindle. And if you run surveys and look at surveys, they'll all tell you Amazon is the #1 place for reading electronic books and buying your electronic device, such as Kindle. But what about the Nook? That's made by Barnes & Noble. What about Apple? The iPad. There's so many different Apple devices. Well, Apple sells ebooks. Barnes & Noble, of course, sells ebooks and paperbacks and audiobooks. Well, I finally decided what I would do is to break away from the exclusivity of Amazon. And when I did this, it wasn't because Amazon was no good at what they did. I give them 5 stars. Amazon has a great business model, and they do a great job. But my work depended on wanting to sell my books in any format and on any device that a person might have. Greatest decision I ever made. Now, the other thing that I did was, I'm going to have to figure this one out. So as I wrote the book, I finally decided, okay, there's more. It was a lot of fun closing down, getting my first book published, and my second one, and third one. And I finally wrote about 12 different novels and tried to sell these novels, and they didn't sell. And one of the reasons I'm doing this, now I have to tell you right now, the beginning, one of the things I went through was that I did find publishers for my book. But really, no matter what they tell you out there, these publishers will get your book, get your money, put it out there, and that's all they do. There's no more support from them. All they're trying to do is get the exclusivity to sell your book, and they don't help you at all. Now, if you want to market your book, you'll send everybody over to them, and they're going to get a piece of the action. So I decided to be my own publisher, and you can too. these next 10 steps that I'll give you, I'll get in more depth on what I used, what software I tried, and I tried it all. And I'll help you publish that book at the most minimum amount. As a matter of fact, I can help you get that book published and do it the right way, and it won't cost you a penny. But when you get into it, this is where I did. I'll give you an example. Well, no, I won't give you an example. I'll wait till my next podcast comes out. But all these different software programs that I used, they get you hooked, the free part. And then, like this podcast here, I can do all sorts of graphics and things, but you got to pay a little extra to get this bonus part of the software. And I did on some of these programs pay the extra because I got my money back. I can tell you that by paying the extra. And you can too. So stay tuned as I'll go over what these 10 steps are. And then in each one of those different 10 steps, I will show you from start to finish how you pull up whichever program that I'm talking about, how you use the program. I'll give you an example. If you want to cut an audiobook of your ebook and your paperback book, you can do that. And I'm going to recommend that you do that. You use a program known as Audacity. Audacity, if you go out to the internet, there's hundreds and hundreds of programs. How do you use Audacity? I spent probably 6 months learning how to do everything that they talked about on the internet. But you don't have to do that. You stay tuned to my show, and I will show you how to record an audiobook, how to set the particular parameters to make you sound like a radio professional when you're giving that audio broadcast of your book. So, I got to go, and anyhow, it's been a pleasure today. I know I won't make as much mistakes in the future because I am totally off script for Season 5, Episode 1. But that's my story from the beginning, and I will see you